The explosion that tore through the skies above the desert planet of Lasaris sent a shockwave that rattled the very core of the barren, red landscape. A transport ship, its hull cracked and disintegrating in the wake of the blast, fell like a comet, its flames licking the heavens before it plummeted to the earth below. Inside the wreckage was an alien girl, small, frail, and unconscious, tangled within the twisted remains of the ship. Her body, unlike any human form, was adorned with pale, translucent skin that shimmered faintly under the dying light of the sun. Her forelimbs were slender, thin, with delicate, claw-like fingers that could barely hold onto the wreckage that had become her prison. Her face was childlike in its features but elongated, with eyes that seemed to be black pools, deep and endless, as if they could reflect the very universe itself. The girl had no name, no voice, and no one to hear her screams if she could. She had arrived on Lasaris as part of a diplomatic envoy in an attempt to establish a fragile peace between warring factions of her species and a few neighboring planets. But peace was fragile in the galaxy, and her ship was attacked by unknown assailants. Now, she was the lone survivor of a destroyed mission, trapped in a foreign world, alone and struggling to breathe. No one came for her. Not the other inhabitants of Lasaris, who were too busy with their own petty wars, their thirst for resources, and their cruel indifference. Not the rescue ships that were never dispatched. No signal reached the larger galaxies, no alert came to those who might have cared. And most chilling of all, not the other factions of her species, who had long abandoned their loyalty to each other in favor of political games. The alien girl was left behind, discarded like so much space debris. Her life, an ancient story of intergalactic politics, had crumbled into a single moment of agonizing survival. Lieutenant Samira Clark was a medic, but not just any medic. She was a survivor. A seasoned veteran of the United Coalition forces, Samira had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer. She had treated wounds inflicted by blasters, patched up soldiers who had survived battles in planets with toxic atmospheres, and even dealt with the aftermath of devastating biochemical warfare. Her hands, calloused from years of training, were steady in their work. But none of that had prepared her for the shock she would find in the remote desert regions of Lasaris. Samira's transport ship landed with a soft thud in the arid sand, its engines cooling off from the brief, hard flight. The planet was known for its arid climate and harsh terrain, but it wasn't why Samira was there. A distress signal had been intercepted, a strange, untraceable transmission that seemed to be human but also something else. She had been dispatched with a small crew to investigate, not knowing what they would find, but knowing that it had to be something important. The moment she stepped out of the ship, her boots sinking into the scorching sand, Samira felt a deep unease gnawing at her. The air was too still. The desert had a way of swallowing everything in silence. The kind of silence that felt like it was waiting for something. Then, the wreckage appeared on the horizon. The ship that had fallen from the sky was unrecognizable. Its metallic hull was twisted like a giant tin can, half submerged in the sand. The strange markings etched into the side symbols that weren't quite alien, but not human either gave her pause. Samira's pulse quickened. She had seen alien technology before, but nothing like this. Her heart pounded as she approached the wreckage. The medic in her quickly assessed the situation, no survivors except one. A small figure, half buried in the remains of the ship, was barely breathing. The girl was unconscious, her body barely held together by the wreckage. She had sustained injuries, deep gashes on her arms and legs from the crash, her skin bruised and burned. Samira's medical training kicked in automatically. She rushed forward, pulling out a portable medical kit, her hands moving swiftly and with purpose. Hey, stay with me," Samira muttered, more to herself than to the alien girl, as she examined her wounds. The creature's pulse was faint, weak, yet there was something deeply wrong about her anatomy. Despite all her training, Samira had never seen anything like it. Her heart skipped as she checked the girl's breathing. "Come on. You're not going to die here," she said under her breath, taking a deep breath of her own as she worked. She used her med-kit scan function to assess the damage. Many of the girl's internal organs had sustained trauma, and she was severely dehydrated. But one thing was certain, the alien girl was alive. Samira wasn't going to let that life fade away on her watch. In the days that followed, Samira did everything she could to keep the girl alive. She gave her fluids intravenously, used her ship's limited resources to create a stable environment for the alien girl to heal in. She ran scans on her body, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, but the readings didn't match any known species. There were similarities to humanoid biology, yes, but nothing that fit neatly into any human or alien database. Samira often found herself talking to the girl, even though she couldn't understand her language or read her emotions. There were no signs of consciousness, only the occasional flutter of her large, dark eyes. Samira's attempts to communicate were met with silence, but she refused to give up. "What happened to you?" she would ask. "Who did this to you?" For all her efforts, the girl remained an enigma, strange and distant, her once vibrant skin now ghostly pale, her form frail and vulnerable. But Samira wasn't going to leave her in this state. She stayed by her side day and night, watching over her as if she were the girl's last line of defense. It was on the fourth day that the girl finally moved. Her hand twitched. Samira leaned in closer, her heart leaping. "You're awake?" The alien girl's eyes fluttered open, revealing the deep, black pupils. She blinked, staring at Samira with an expression of confusion and fear. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, Samira simply gazed at her, unsure of what to do next. "Hey," she said gently, her voice calm and soothing. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." The alien girl looked at Samira with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Samira could see the confusion and fear in her expression. It was as if she had never been treated with kindness before, as if trust was something that was foreign to her. "I'm Samira," she continued, trying to offer some sense of comfort. "You're not alone anymore." The girl blinked again, her black eyes shimmering with something a flicker of recognition, perhaps, before she slowly reached out a hand. Samira, hesitant but relieved, took it. The warmth of the girl's touch sent a shiver down her spine. "You're going to be okay," Samira whispered. As the alien girl's health began to improve, Samira's curiosity grew. Who was she? Why was she alone? And what had happened to the ship and crew she had come from? With every passing day, the girl became more aware of her surroundings. She could move now, though unsteadily, and sometimes Samira could swear she saw her studying her surroundings, absorbing every detail as if trying to piece together the fragments of a memory long lost. The girl's behavior was strange, but Samira couldn't help but grow attached to her. In her isolated world, far from the chaos of war and the politics of the galaxy, this alien girl was a connection to something unknown, something greater than herself. And perhaps, in a way, she was all Samira had left. "You're going to have to tell me your name soon," Samira said one evening as she carefully adjusted the girl's 4 fluids. "I can't keep calling you girl forever." The girl tilted her head slightly at the words, as if contemplating them. Then, in a voice that was like the soft hum of wind against glass, she spoke one word. "Lyra." Samira smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. "Lyra," she repeated softly. "I like that." And just like that, a connection was made. The medic and the alien girl. 2 beings from different worlds, bound together by the sheer will to survive. Chapter 5: The Language of Silence. Lyra's recovery was slow, but every day brought new signs of progress. Samira, as her medic and now her only companion, kept her engaged, speaking to her, showing her small parts of the ship, and teaching her basic human phrases. Samira's attempts to communicate felt like an exercise in patience, but it was also a challenge that made her feel more connected to Lyra. There was something magnetic about the alien girl, a mystery Samira couldn't ignore. Lyra had begun to speak more, though her voice remained distant and strained, as if words were foreign to her. But each time she spoke, Samira learned more about her. "Lyra." Samira whispered as she sat on the floor beside her, "What happened to your ship? Why were you attacked?" The alien girl, sitting cross-legged on the bed, gazed at Samira with dark, solemn eyes. She hesitated for a long moment, her thin fingers twitching as if trying to grasp the right words. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "Not safe." Samira raised an eyebrow, taking note of her words. "Who isn't safe? You? Or the ship?" Lyra's eyes lowered to her lap, the weight of her memories causing her shoulders to slump. "They came. Bad ones." Samira's heart skipped a beat. "Who came?" Lyra hesitated again. Her mouth opened, then closed, her body tensing as if the words physically hurt her. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, as if Lyra was afraid to speak more. Samira didn't push her further, understanding that whatever had happened, it was too painful to revisit right away. Instead, she gave Lyra a gentle, reassuring smile. "Okay. It's okay. We don't have to talk about it just yet." As the days passed, the planet of Lysaris revealed itself to be more dangerous than Samira had anticipated. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, and the storm systems were unpredictable. Still, Samira had a mission. While Lyra continued to regain her strength, Samira knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. The distress signal, though faint and distorted, had led her here. And if she was the first to arrive, there might be more who followed. People weren't always as kind as Samira. One evening, as Samira prepared a basic meal for the two of them, her communication device buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, glancing at the incoming transmission. The signal was coming from the United Coalition, but it was fragmented, likely due to the planet's unstable atmosphere. "Samira Clark, this is Captain Elena of the 7th Fleet. We've tracked your location. What's the situation?" Samira's heart leapt at the sound of another human voice. It was good to know that help might be on the way. She keyed her response. "Captain, I found an alien survivor. It's complicated. Her ship was attacked. She's hurt but recovering. I need assistance, but we might need to extract her carefully. Her species might not be friendly to us." Elena's voice crackled through the comm. "We'll be there in 48 hours. Stay put and maintain your position. We'll send a shuttle when we arrive." Samira's brow furrowed. 48 hours was too long. It was a long time to wait, and Samira's instincts told her that something was wrong. Something wasn't right about Lyra's crash, about the lack of any rescue efforts. She needed to know more, but she had no resources, no way to investigate further. All she could do was wait and protect Lyra. That night, as the wind howled outside the small shelter Samira had set up within the wreckage of her own ship, Lyra suddenly stood up from her bed. She moved quickly, her slender body shifting with an unsettling fluidity. Samira was still awake, scanning the data pads and reviewing her medical records when she heard the soft sound of Lyra's footsteps. "Lyra?" Samira asked, her voice soft but concerned. The alien girl, who had been growing stronger with each passing day, was now standing by the doorway, her dark eyes scanning the desert outside. Her posture was rigid, tense, as though she was listening for something Samira couldn't hear. "What's wrong?" Samira asked, standing up to approach her. "Is it your wounds? Do you need more?" Lyra turned to face her, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out. Her eyes were wide with terror, as though she had seen something beyond Samira's comprehension. Then, without a moment's hesitation, Lyra grabbed Samira's arm and yanked her toward the shelter's small window. Out in the distance, a faint glimmer of movement caught Samira's eye. Something large, something dark, shifted across the sand dunes in the far distance. It was hard to make out, but Samira's training told her immediately that it wasn't just the wind. This was no natural movement. "Samira," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're coming." Samira froze, her blood running cold. She had expected something, maybe other survivors, maybe a rescue team, but not this. Who? Samira whispered back, her voice just as hushed. Lyra's eyes flickered nervously, and she lowered her voice even further. The ones who attacked us. The ones who follow. Before Samira could ask more, the faint tremor of distant engines reached her ears. Something large and mechanical was moving closer. Samira's heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her away from the window. The last thing they needed was to be seen. She quickly moved to lock the door, but her mind raced with the realization that they wouldn't be safe for long. The distant shadows were coming closer, and there was nowhere to run. Lyra's panic was palpable. She tugged at Samira's sleeve, her breath quickening as if the very air around them had turned toxic. Lyra, we need to hide. Do you know where Samira began? But she was cut off by the sudden, sharp noise of metal scraping against metal. The enemy was here. Without another word, Samira grabbed a weapon from the corner of the room, a small, compact laser pistol that she'd kept for emergencies, and handed it to Lyra. The alien girl didn't hesitate to accept it, though her fingers trembled around it. Samira didn't know if Lyra had ever used such a weapon before, but there was no time to teach her. You need to stay quiet, Samira said, her voice urgent. If we're going to survive, we need to move fast. Lyra nodded but stayed frozen, her eyes wide with fear. She understood the gravity of the situation, but Samira could feel the alien girl's sense of helplessness. She had never been on her own before, never had to fight. The ground shook as the metallic hum of engines grew louder. Samira's mind raced as she scanned the room for options. The entrance was blocked, the window wasn't an option. But they could try to escape into the wreckage of the crashed ship outside. She knew there was a maintenance tunnel, a small, hidden route that could give them a chance at slipping away undetected. It wasn't ideal, but it was their only option. Follow me, Samira ordered, grabbing Lyra's hand again and pulling her toward the door. They moved quickly, the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder. Lyra's breathing was shallow, her hand clenching tightly around the laser weapon. She had not yet spoken of her past, but Samira knew that whatever had happened to her before, whoever had done this to her was still haunting her every step. As the two of them reached the outer door of the ship, Samira glanced over her shoulder one last time. The shadows were almost upon them. And they weren't alone. Samira and Lyra's escape into the desert was just the beginning of a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The beings who had attacked Lyra's ship were relentless, and now they were hunting the two of them across a vast and hostile planet. With every step they took, the stakes grew higher. What Samira didn't know was that Lyra's story was far from over. There were dark forces at play, forces that had been manipulating the galaxy for centuries, and Lyra, unknowingly, held the key to stopping them. But first, they had to survive. Chapter 10: The Underground. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of sand and harsh winds. Samira and Lyra moved swiftly, their steps barely audible over the howl of the winds, the air stinging their faces as they ran. Samira kept her eyes on the horizon, constantly scanning for any sign of movement. Lyra, though weak from her earlier injuries, was surprisingly agile, her alien senses sharper than Samira could have anticipated. Every now and then, Samira would glance over at her, noticing how the girl seemed to move almost intuitively, as if she knew the land around them better than Samira did. We need to get to the ship's wreckage, Samira whispered urgently, her voice strained as she led them through the ever-changing dunes. There's an underground maintenance tunnel. It's our only way out of here. Lyra nodded without a word, her gaze flickering to the distance, as if anticipating an attack. Samira was starting to realize just how much Lyra had been through, how much more there was to her than she had first believed. This girl was no mere survivor of a crash, she was someone who had been through wars, battles, betrayals, and loss. It was written in the way she held herself, in the sharpness of her eyes, in the way she reacted to every sound around them. They reached the wreckage after what felt like an eternity, their breaths ragged and bodies tired, but Samira knew they couldn't stop yet. Not until they were safely underground. The sound of engines still echoed in the distance, closer now, and Samira could almost feel the pressure of the enemy closing in around them. "Here," Samira muttered, pulling Lyra toward a partially buried access panel in the wreckage. She didn't wait to check for danger. She punched in the code on a small panel, a lock mechanism clicking open with a soft, metallic hiss. "Stay close," Samira said, leading Lyra down a narrow, dark stairwell. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of burnt metal and scorched earth hung heavy. The tunnel was low, barely wide enough for them to walk side by side, but it was a way to escape. A way to buy them time. The stairs creaked as they descended, the low hum of the emergency generators lighting their way. Samira could feel the oppressive weight of the planet closing in around them, the endless desert above them replaced by the damp, claustrophobic air of the underground. They were safe for now, but Samira knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy found their trail. Once they reached the bottom, Samira stopped and turned to face Lyra. The alien girl was already standing motionless, her eyes narrowed, ears twitching slightly as she listened to something Samira couldn't hear. "What is it?" Samira asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her instincts were on high alert, but she trusted Lyra more than she could explain. "They're close," Lyra said softly, her voice strained as she looked over her shoulder. Samira cursed under her breath. They couldn't stay here for long. She pulled out a small device from her pack, an emergency transmitter, and began to dial in the coordinates of their last known position. "Maybe the coalition will be able to help," Samira muttered. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't that simple. There were too many unknowns, and the more time they spent here, the more danger they were in. She had to get Lyra off the planet, and fast. The underground passage led them deeper into the network of old, abandoned tunnels that had once served as maintenance for the spaceport. But Samira knew these tunnels were much older, likely built during a time when the planet had been a hub for various intergalactic trade routes. Now, they were little more than relics forgotten and neglected by the war-torn factions who ruled the surface. They walked for hours, Samira keeping a watchful eye on Lyra, but the alien girl was quiet, distant, as if lost in her thoughts. Samira had learned to read her signs. The more she was silent, the more her memories, her fears took over. Finally, as the tunnels curved into a large cavern, Lyra stopped. Her body stiffened, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. Samira followed her line of sight, squinting into the dim light. What she saw sent a chill down her spine. At the far side of the cavern was an old control panel, its screens flickering with static. But what caught Samira's attention wasn't the equipment, it was the strange, translucent structure next to it. It looked like a fragment of a larger object, something crystalline, almost alive in the way it seemed to pulse with faint energy. Samira felt an unsettling sensation wash over her as she approached. "Do you know what this is?" Samira asked quietly. Lyra nodded slowly, her face ashen. "This is what they want. This is what they'll come for." Samira's brows furrowed. "What is it? And who's they?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze never leaving the strange structure. "This crystal. It's the key. A key to the energy they use to destroy my world. To control all of us." Samira's heart sank as the implications of Lyra's words hit her. This wasn't just a random attack. This wasn't a mistake. Whatever Lyra's species was running from, whatever they had fled, it had a much larger purpose, a purpose tied to this crystal and the enemies that hunted them. "What do you mean, control all of us?" Samira asked. "Who is it? Who's after you?" "They are called the Zhy Archon," Lyra said softly. "They are the masters of manipulation. They rule from the shadows, and they hunt us, my people, for what we carry. The crystal is a part of us." Samira's mind was reeling. "A part of you?" Lyra looked at her, and for the first time, Samira saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "We were once a peaceful race. We shared knowledge, exchanged ideas. But the Zhy Archon came, and they took everything. My people. They are using the crystal to control us." They wanted to enslave us, and now they want to destroy the last of us. Samira felt her stomach twist. This was no ordinary war. It was a war for survival. And Lyra, this alien girl she had saved, was at the center of it all. They're not just after you, are they? Samira asked, her voice steady despite the growing realization. They're after the crystal. And they'll stop at nothing to get it. Lyra's nod was all the confirmation Samira needed. The crystal is my people's last hope, Lyra whispered, her eyes dark. Without it, we are lost. No sooner had Lyra finished speaking than a deep, ominous rumble echoed through the caverns. Samira froze, her blood running cold as the sound of approaching machinery reached her ears. They're here, Lyra whispered. Samira's heart raced. The Zhy Archon had found them. It was only a matter of time before they descended on the tunnels, and the only thing standing between them and the crystal was Samira and Lyra. We need to move, Samira said urgently. We have to get out of here before they lock this place down. But as Samira turned to lead the way, she heard the unmistakable sound of boots marching across the rocky floor, coming from the entrance to the cavern. There was no escape. The Zhy Archon had arrived. And they were ready for a fight. The Zhy Archon were here. Samira's pulse hammered in her ears as the rumble of approaching footsteps grew louder. The echoes of mechanical boots reverberated off the walls of the cavern, and Samira could sense the imminent danger. She turned sharply to Lyra, who was standing frozen in place, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. For a brief moment, Samira wondered if she had made the right decision in staying here. They were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. We can't stay here, Samira whispered, grabbing Lyra's arm. She pulled her toward a narrow passageway on the far side of the cavern. We need to move now. We have to get to the surface. It's our only chance. Lyra didn't need any more encouragement. She followed Samira without a word, her steps quick and light as she moved through the narrow tunnel with an uncanny ease. Samira's heart raced in her chest as she led the way, feeling the oppressive weight of the Zhy Archon's presence closing in behind them. The entrance to the cavern was only a few meters away now, and Samira's mind worked frantically to come up with a plan. They couldn't outrun them, and she didn't have enough firepower to take on the Zhy Archon head-on. But maybe there was another way, something to buy them time. They reached the entrance of the tunnel, and Samira glanced over her shoulder. The Zhy Archon were closer now, their low voices muttering in an alien tongue, their forms silhouetted against the dim glow of the tunnel's lights. Samira pulled Lyra close, ducking into a small alcove just off the main path. She could hear the Zhy Archon's voices now, their guttural words sending chills down her spine. They were searching. They were coming closer. And then, with a sharp, sudden burst of energy, one of the Zhy Archon soldiers entered the cavern. The soldier's form was massive, its armor gleaming a dull black, reflecting the pale light of the cavern's ambient glow. It moved with mechanical precision, scanning the area as though it could sense the hidden threat. Samira held her breath, praying that they wouldn't be spotted. But the Zhy Archon weren't known for their mercy. Spread out. The leader ordered in a harsh, clicking language. The soldier's voice echoed off the walls. Find them. They must be close. Samira's heart raced. They had to act fast before they were cornered. She gestured to Lyra. We're going to make a break for it, she whispered urgently. On my signal, we run straight for the surface. Do you understand? Lyra's eyes locked onto Samira's, and for the first time, Samira saw something like trust flicker in the alien girl's gaze. It was as though Lyra finally realized the depth of Samira's determination to keep her safe. Lyra nodded silently, her hand tightening around the weapon Samira had given her. The Zhy Archon soldier stepped closer, his glowing eyes scanning every shadow. Samira's breath caught in her throat, and her grip on the gun tightened. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. With a final glance at Lyra, Samira counted under her breath. 3, 2, 1, run. Without waiting another second, Samira surged forward, her boots pounding against the rocky floor as she dashed toward the surface entrance. Lyra followed closely behind, her form moving with surprising speed despite her injuries. The sound of the Zhyarkhan's voices rose sharply behind them. "Stop them!" the leader shouted. "Do not let them escape." Samira's heart pounded as she neared the exit. The daylight beyond was barely visible, but she could sense the approaching danger. The Zhyarkhan were right on their heels. They were almost there. Just as Samira reached the surface, she heard a loud bang, and a blur of motion passed by her ear. A Zhyarkhan soldier had fired, narrowly missing her. Samira ducked instinctively, pulling Lyra to the side. "Get to the ship!" Samira shouted. "Move, move, move!" With the Zhyarkhan closing in, Samira and Lyra darted across the desert landscape, their footsteps quick in the sand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the empty plains. Samira's breath was ragged, but she couldn't stop now. They were so close to the ship's wreckage. So close to safety. But then, a loud roar echoed through the air, and Samira froze. A Zhyarkhan fighter craft streaked across the sky, its engines roaring with power. It was fast, almost too fast to follow, and it was heading directly toward them. "Get down!" Samira shouted, throwing herself to the sand and pulling Lyra down beside her. The fighter craft hovered above them, its sleek black shape blocking out the dimming sun. The machine locked onto their position with terrifying precision. Samira's thoughts raced. They had no cover. No time to fight back. "Please, please." Samira whispered to herself, hoping against hope that the coalition ships would arrive in time. Suddenly, a crackle of static broke through the tense silence. Samira's communicator buzzed in her ear. "Lieutenant Clark, this is Captain Elena," a voice shouted through the crackling noise. "We've detected your position. Hold on, we're coming in hot." A surge of relief flooded Samira's body. But it wasn't enough. The Zhyarkhan were already preparing for their next move. The fighter craft lowered even further, and Samira could hear the distinct hum of a weapon charging. "Get down!" Samira screamed at Lyra, pushing her into the sand as the weapon discharged. The sky exploded in a flash of blinding light as the Zhyarkhan's weapon fired directly at them. Samira felt the ground tremble beneath her, the shockwave sending sand flying. Her vision blurred with the intensity of the blast, and she instinctively shielded Lyra with her body. For a moment, there was nothing but dust and chaos. The blast had knocked them both to the ground, the sand swirling around them in a haze. Samira's ears rang from the explosion, but she could hear Lyra's breath, shallow and quick beneath her. "Lyra," Samira whispered, shaking her by the shoulders, "are you all right?" The alien girl didn't respond right away, but then her eyes fluttered open, her skin pale from the blast, but otherwise unharmed. She looked up at Samira, her expression one of determination, though it was mixed with a touch of fear. Before Samira could say anything else, the unmistakable sound of engines roaring pierced the air. A massive ship of coalition cruisers swooped down from the clouds above, its sleek frame cutting through the sky. Samira's heart soared with hope. "Samira, get down!" a voice shouted from the craft's open hatch. A moment later, the ship unleashed a volley of plasma fire at the Zhyarkhan fighter, sending it spiraling away into the distance, its engine sputtering. The coalition had arrived. Samira didn't waste another second. She grabbed Lyra's arm and yanked her toward the ship's hatch, where a team of soldiers was already waiting to pull them inside. "Get on board, now!" one of the soldiers barked, his voice gruff but urgent. Samira and Lyra scrambled into the hatch, and the door slammed shut behind them, sealing them safely inside. The ship's engines roared to life as they pulled away from the desert, leaving the Zhyarkhan fighters far behind. As they ascended into the sky, Samira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They had made it. For now. As the coalition cruiser cruised away from Lascaris, the crew worked quickly to stabilize Lyra. Samira sat by her side, her eyes scanning the data pads the medics handed her. They would need to figure out what happened next. The Zhyarkhan were relentless, and though they had won this battle, the war was far from over. Lyra had something the Zhyarkhan needed, and Samira would protect her no matter the cost. But as she looked down at the alien girl, who was now resting quietly beside her, Samira knew one thing for sure: their story was just beginning. The final stand. Samira and Lyra found temporary refuge aboard the coalition cruiser, but they knew it wouldn't last. The Zhyarkhan would not give up so easily, and Lyra's connection to the mysterious crystal made her a prime target. As they made their way to a hidden base on a distant moon, Lyra finally unlocked the secrets of the crystal, revealing that it held the power to disrupt the Zhyarkhan's control over entire civilizations. But its activation came at a cost. Lyra would have to channel its energy, risking her life in the process. With time running out, Samira made a choice. She would stand by Lyra, no matter the danger. Together, they activated the crystal, unleashing a shockwave that crippled the Zhyarkhan's fleet and shattered their hold over the galaxy. In the aftermath, the Zhyarkhan retreated, and Lyra, though weakened, was alive. The coalition offered her a place among them, but she chose to stay with Samira. They both had unfinished business, new allies to find, and enemies to face down. The war wasn't over, but Samira and Lyra were ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together.